Good evening and welcome everyone. My name is Marcela Guerrero, pronouns she, her, ella. I'm one of the assistant curators at the Whitney Museum of American Art. Before I begin my opening remarks, I want to remind those who want to access closed captioning in English that they can do so by turning on this feature on the options bar below. And thank you, Morgan Pate from LC Interpreting Services for the live captioning. Um, Tonight, unfortunately, our live interpreters in Spanish couldn't be here, but we will eventually be providing an interpretation or translation of this recording in Spanish. So welcome to Muralism Today, Contemporary Artists Respond to Vida Americana, a program that brings together artists Judith Baca, Derek Fordjour, Aliza Nisenbaum, and Juan Sanchez to reflect on the ways that Mexican muralism and the work of Los Tres Grandes, Orozco, Rivera, and Siqueiros, has continued almost 100 years later to inspire contemporary art. The ancestral lands from where the muralists came and those that they visited in the 20s and 30s, known geopolitically as Mexico and the United States, respectively, were, are, and will continue to be indigenous territories. I'm speaking to you today specifically from the lands of the Canarsie and Muncie Lenape, otherwise called Crown Heights, Brooklyn. I encourage everyone to take a moment to acknowledge the indigenous lands from where you're joining us tonight. And this week, before the holiday known as Thanksgiving, I urge you to please take a moment to reflect on the history of this land. In addition to this spatial acknowledgement, I also want to position myself temporarily. For me, this means coming to you today affirming that Black Lives Matter and in solidarity with the families and communities that have lost loved ones or have suffered as a consequence of police brutality and white supremacy. Likewise, the ongoing and unrelenting trauma of this pandemic still weighs heavily on many of us. So thank you for taking the time to be with us this evening. Tonight, I have the pleasure to introduce to you four outstanding artists. I'll give abbreviated bios, but you can Google them for their full CVs. Judith Baca founded the City of Los Angeles' first mural program in 1974, which produced over 400 murals and employed thousands of local participants, and evolved into an arts organization known as the Social and Public Art Resource Center, SPARC. She continues to serve as SPARC's artistic director, and she is a professor emeritus of the University of California, Los Angeles, where she was a senior professor in Chicana, Chicano Studies, and World Art and Cultures departments from 1980 until 2018. Derek Fordjour was born in Memphis, Tennessee, to Ghanaian parents. He has received commissions for public projects from the Whitney and the Metropolitan Transit Authority of New York City for a permanent installation at the 145th Street subway station in Manhattan. Fordjour frequently serves as a lecturer at institutions and as a core critic at Yale University School of Art. He recently opened an exhibition at the Petzel Gallery in New York. Aliza Nisenbaum was born in Mexico City and is currently in Los Angeles, although her home base is in New York. Her portraits of undocumented Latin American immigrants and other distinct communities are intimate exchanges between herself and her subjects. Her work was included in the Whitney Biennial 2017, and her solo show at Tate Liverpool opens next month, December 2020. She is assistant professor of visual arts at Columbia University School of the Arts. Juan Sanchez is an influential American visual artist and one of the most important New Yorican cultural figures of the latter 20th century. He has produced an extensive body of work that addresses social and political issues such as race and class, cultural identity, equality, social justice, and self-determination. Sanchez is a professor of art and art history at Hunter College. With this incredible group, tonight's conversation will explore each artist's specific contact points with the art of the muralists. We will also ruminate on the lessons from this period in our history that are still relevant today. Art, after the Mexican Revolution and the Great Depression in the US, served as a vehicle to reconstruct both nations while at the same time decrying the oppressive forces working against the masses. Artists in the US committed to telling the unvarnished truth about racial and social oppression affecting Black Americans, as well as Asian Americans, Latinx, Indigenous people, and also union strikers and other members of the working class. Parallels with our current moment are eerily similar. Thus, we must ask, what is the art that today's society deserves? I hope that my guests tonight, along with all of you who are watching, will collectively think deeply about the connections between both periods and, perhaps more importantly, how the arts can envision a future that's better than the present. Before I turn the conversation to our four esteemed guests, I want to explain tonight's sequence. Each artist will have between 7 and 10 minutes to talk about their work in connection to works in Vida Americana. After all four have presented, I will ask them a couple of questions before opening the floor to questions from the audience. I encourage everyone to submit their questions and comments via the Q&A function at any point in the evening. And if you have any technical difficulties, please let us know using the same box and our team will do their best to help you. So with that, I turn it to Judy Baca.
Hi, sorry, Marcela, this is Andy chiming in real quick. Unfortunately, there was a miscommunication and our interpreters are here. So I'd like to turn things over to Babia Colectivo. I'm going to paste their instructions into the chat window for everyone and turn things over to Babia very quickly. Thank you so much.
Hi, everybody. I'm going to give this announcement in English and in Spanish. Voy a dar este anuncio en inglés y en español. We are offering simultaneous interpretation tonight for the event. We will be doing that through the Zoom interpretation feature. Vamos a estar ofreciendo interpretación simultánea hoy para el evento entre inglés y español a través del sistema de Zoom de interpretación. Basically, on the bottom right of your screen, you will see an interpretation globe sign that you can click on and select English or Spanish. En la parte de abajo derecha de su pantalla puede ver un globo que dice interpretación y una vez le dé clic a ese enlace puede escoger entre el canal de inglés o español. You can select between the English and Spanish language, or you can also mute original audio to only hear the interpretation. También puede silenciar el audio original para solamente escuchar la interpretación. We will be in the channels interpreting from Spanish to English and from English to Spanish simultaneously as the conversation happens. Estaremos interpretando de inglés a español y de español a inglés en los canales mientras pasa la conversación. If you have any technical issues, you can message me, Cristóbal, or my co-interpreter, Patri. Whoever is on mute will be able to support you with any technical issues. Si tienen algún problema, me puedes mensajear a mí, Cristóbal, o a Patri. Si tienen algún problema con la interpretación, cualquiera de los dos que esté en silencio los puede ayudar. Thank you very much and have a great event.
Hello, this is Judy Baca. I'm going to begin today with perhaps the most influential work that has informed my practice as a muralist. I begin my form as an artist with muralism. And this piece perhaps had more influence than any other in Los Angeles for muralists. This is a piece called America Tropical. It was painted on Alvera Street in 1932 by the Maestro Siqueiros with a block of painters, a whole group of painters who worked with him. It was not very long-lived. The central image of a crucified figure, the campesino, the American dollar, the American eagle, and particularly those figures holding the guns on the right were very controversial and actually made possible the censorship of this work in the first year that it was painted. The first, the figures with the guns, and then second, the entire work was crossed out, was painted over. Slide, please. One of the interesting things about the paint out was that while it was covered in white paint, it preserved this work and it stayed under this paint for like 70 years. And because of the paint over, the figure, actually, the central figure started to come up in the late 60s. And it was a very significant event in terms of the civil rights activism in Los Angeles, particularly for the Latino community. We began to see Siqueiros' work reemerge in Alvera Street. The notion was that Siqueiros was to paint this beautiful piece about a tropical land with fruits falling off the trees into the mouths of people. And he sent away his painters, and the last night and he painted the central crucified figure as his final application to the mural. Slide, please. Slide, please. I think one of the most important things for me was that seeing this work and beginning in the 1960s to apply my own work as a young student and a person just coming out of the university, I was interested in creating work that actually spoke to my community, that actually supported the civil rights movement. And that led me to a series of works, and particularly, I'm going to show you three, the Great Wall of Los Angeles. The Los Angeles story begins with a river. Every great city in the world was was founded on the basis of a river. Slide, please. But in the 1920s, we had particularly bad flooding, and the Los Angeles, which was becoming a city of real estate value, became a city in which the river had to be tamed. The river had to be controlled by the city fathers so that, in fact, that real estate would not be taken up. So they began a building project that went on for 30 years and concreted the arteries of the land. Slide, please. This is the site in which I began to think about painting a recovery of this river. Because if you could destroy a river, how much easier is it to destroy the stories of the people? And so because of the fact that the population of Los Angeles is primarily of color, and because of so many parts of our communities are segregated and divided, and I grew up very close to the edge of the river as it turned to concrete, I began this process of painting a narrative work that tells the alternate story of America, the story that looks at my families, my ancestors, and the ancestors of many of the young people in those communities, and to recover that and to place it in the river. Slide, please. The defining metaphor for this work, slide, please. It was the tattoo on the scar where the river once ran. I began to think if we couldn't take the river out, the concreted river, but the hardened arteries, in a sense, created this disease and division of communities. And the application of a mural on this site and the bringing together of people from all over the city, from these variant communities, to work together in communities that had historically racial warfare, historically divisions between them, and paint a long narrative work became a focus in my life. And in fact, it's become my life's work. Slide, please. We began by cleaning the channel and developing with the Army Corps of Engineers. I worked with them to design a park alongside of the river. Slide, please. It became a place where we could walk the trails. And as you walk the trail, you could feel the weight of history. And what I was looking for was the indigenous people's presence. I was looking for the story of what women had contributed, what African Americans and what Latinos and what Asians had contributed to the building of our country, so absent in the stories and the teaching to our young people. And so what you're seeing here is us on Tongva land recovering the story of the river and the story of the people. Slide, please. This is one segment, and it began to become a systematized method of painting in which we would look at segment by segment and have it relate to a particular era. Slide, please. So in the process of the creation of this work, over 400 young people were brought in from primarily the juvenile justice system, because I was working with monies that were related to poverty. And as a result of that, they were also related to incarceration. So that African Americans and Latinos were primarily the most arrested youth in the city. And so what you're looking at is kids who are from the juvenile justice system, but oftentimes just regular kids from our neighborhoods. Slides, please. The story was a kind of evolving story. And this is one sequence of a moment in Los Angeles history in which over 500,000 people were deported during an anti-immigrant sentiment, one like the ones that we have been experiencing now. And Mexican people were rounded up and put on these trains and sent back to Mexico, many of them having never lived there. Slides, please. So this is a blueprint, and these blueprints were created so that young people could actually work with these things and apply it. Officers hurl back alien horde is exactly from the newspaper headlines that inform people's visions of who this group of people were. Slide, please. So each section tells you a different story. This is the division of the Barrios and the advent of Chavez Ravine. This is Dodger Stadium coming into the oldest historic Mexican community of Los Angeles. Slide, please. Today, we are putting a bridge across this site, and we're making it with some cementitious material that includes the refuge of the river. And we call this the interpretive green bridge. What is important about this is that we're making the relationship between the destruction of the river and the environmental damage that it has done, and also the stories of the people. Slide, please. This is what it looked like. This is our plans at the moment. In addition to that, we're lighting up the site. Slide, please. And what will happen is that at night there will be a walking trail. There's a walking trail now. You'll be able to use this space. And given the pandemic, the trails have been heavily used now. And because of the story of the reckoning of public monuments, people asking, what is the monument that we need? The Great Wall has become a site where this unfolding story that tells about the contributions of various ethnic people, of the story, for example, of Mrs. Laws, who broke the Black Covenant laws, or of Charles Drew, who invented blood plasma. All these figures are in the Great Wall. And in most cases, this is the only place in Los Angeles where these stories are recognized. Slide, please. This is an important moment for me in the sense that I was commissioned to do a work in Colorado. Slide, please. You can just bring them down one after the other. And this is the first of a series of works that are digital works. And these digital works are the new work that I have been involved in. The last one, please. This is actually my grandfather. I began to tell, this is the first time in which I actually told my own family story about their migration from Chihuahua, Mexico, during the Mexican Revolution. The caminantes, the figures that are standing in the river, are my grandparents as they're making this crossing as if they're walking on water. And reflected in the water is the Cheyenne woman who is one of the survivors of the Cheyenne massacre. My grandfather on the right is standing in the fields alongside of the railroad. The choice he had as a rancher in Mexico when he left was to go to Colorado and to become either a person who worked in the fields, or a person who worked in the railroad, or a person who worked in the mines. So what you're looking at is these figures, which are land memories of the land, including Corky Gonzalez and Cesar Chavez, who brought the great boycott to America and to Colorado. And this is the moment where they're having that discussion in that center image. The miner from Chihuahua, who is dressed in this, he's a coal miner, and he's dressed in this beautiful white wrap. His shoes are polished, and he's very proud of his work. And the figure of the Cheyenne woman, you can see her, was part of a massacre at Sand Creek, which was on the edge of the Luisa Maria Baca land grant. And that is a land grant that I think my family has a relationship to. And if in fact we could prove it, we probably own Denver. I think it's kind of an ironic story, right? On the right side is the furthest image is my grandfather with the railroad workers. You see him standing out with a gray sweatshirt. Slide, please. The final image I'm going to show is Robert Kennedy's work, a piece that is a 50-foot piece. And because it's a site of public memory, this is in a sense, a continuation in these digital works of Siqueiros's innovations. He painted with Portland cement on the America Tropical. He was interested in creating a new kind of fresco technique. Of course, it wasn't entirely successful because it didn't really adhere to that wall. But the painting over of that piece with white paint made it possible for it to be preserved and to come up as an aparición in the middle of a movement that actually gave us the fuel to actually begin a mural movement, which we call the Chicana Renaissance of muralism in Los Angeles. And these figures are all figures who were supporting Robert Kennedy's bid for the presidency. It's painted exactly where Kennedy was murdered in 1969. And it's tiny ripples are coming from the hands. If you do a close-up, each of these figures are people who supported Kennedy, who believe in the values that are placed at the Robert F. Kennedy Learning Center. And so I could identify every person. Each of these hands are painted on screen. There was no brush ever placed on this. but the brushes were on the computer screens and created a whole new method of doing giant scale. And with that, I'll end my presentation. Thank you.
I just wanted to begin by saying that I'm very happy to be here amongst, Judith Baca and the other artists. It's really an honor, but I'm even more excited about the exhibition, which I had the fortune of visiting and seeing, and it's an incredible show. It's an amazing example of how much Mexican muralist art has contributed to American art. And it's very fascinating to see artists like a Jackson Pollock, in that exhibition, and looking at his early work along with the Jacob Lawrences and the Aaron Davises and the Ben Shaw, so I think this is really amazing, incredible. So anyway, I would like to begin by talking about David Alfaro Siqueiros' Echo of a Scream, Eco de un Grito, because that's a painting that I encountered when I was an undergraduate student at Cooper Union School of the Art, and it's a painting that when I saw it for the first time in the Museum of Modern Art, it really impressed me. It really blew me away. And upon seeing this painting at first sight, I could have sworn that I've heard the screaming, the cry of that baby, and the same head just coming out of the mouth, even had further impact. So it made me think about how painting has that power to not only navigate and take people through a visual experience, but interestingly enough, that sound, that impact can also surface from the painting. And the one particular area that really impressed me is the baby's cry, the head, and that influenced a series of works that I've been working on for the past 15 or so years called Cries and Wounded Whispers. Next, please. And so what I see is this cry that emanated and impressed me throughout my life, throughout my tenure as a student and even as a professional artist. And the Cries and Wounded Whispers series, I wanted to find something that had that cry, that had that kind of effect, that speaks to the history of so many incredible individuals advocating for social justice, fighting against racism, fighting against colonialism, not only in Puerto Rico and the United States, but internationally. And so I came across this photograph of my daughter, Leora, when she was just a few months old, and she was crying, of course, in her mother's arm. And I shot the picture and I zoomed into her face, and I kind of like reverted it and turned it into some kind of a mandala that is, I hope, approximate to what I saw in Siqueiros' painting. And that became the element that crossed throughout the series. Next, please. And so this series, this one titled Conflict, really speaks about the situation in the Middle East, and the way I play with that particular symbol, that particular signifier, can also revert into red circles, which could be blood, bullet holes, so on and so forth. But it's all collage mixed media with oil paint, oil stick, and oil pastels. And I reach a point where I don't work with sketches. I just work directly on, the 6x6 feet panels, and everything just becomes almost like an improvisational process. Next. This one, Lindo Rayos, Lindo Colores, one of our national Puerto Rican heroes, Pedro Albizu Campos, who during the time that he was in jail in Puerto Rico, his cell was radiated, and he was slowly killed. And he, as an engineer and a lawyer, knew what was being done to him, but he was categorized as a crazy person. Years later, a lot of information has surfaced that prisons in Puerto Rico, as well as in other parts of the United States, radiation technique was experimented on, including the segregated Black, soldiers were used as guinea pigs. Next, please. This one, titled Strange and Bitter American History, talks about the lynching that took place throughout the United States of Black people and also Mexicans. And the text written across the surface is from the song, the lyrics from the song Strange Fruit. And there's also a text as well by abolitionist John Brown. And the images of the lynch figures actually came from a series of postcards that was being produced at the time of these events, these incidents, which shocked me. And I decided to scan them and incorporate it into the painting. And of course, the cry in red is spread throughout the surface. Next, please. This one, para Neda Egha Sultan, this incredible woman who was shot down by a sniper in Iran. If you remember, I think, I forgot what year that was, but there was an election, and obviously people took to the street because they felt that the election was stolen. And this was her first demonstration that she's gone to, and she was the first person that was killed by a sniper. And she became a symbol of what is then called the Green Movement in Iran. Next, please. This is a collograph photolitho print to honor Rosa Luxemburg. And what I try to do is I try to cover as many people as possible that because of the impact and the influence that they had as activists, they paid a price with their life. Next, please. This one, which is the last piece, is titled Resurrection or Resurrección. And of course, it's the resurrection of the crucifixion and the resurrection of Jesus Christ. And I decided to use the feet of a female model, which represents the feet of Christ rising up into the universe. And I try to apply various symbols that represents a number of faith and religion. Next, please. I am a frustrated muralist. I have done a few, far in between, but I decided to show you this one, which is the latest that I've done back in 2018 for the University of Notre Dame. They were building a new student center, the Duncan Student Center, and 12 feet by 22. Talking about new materials, I decided to go totally digital. I painted, I drew, I appropriated photographs, I scanned them, I assembled it digitally, and being very impressed with the cathedral that's in the center of the campus, I used that as the format to create this piece. And so you have the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. This was created, produced, manufactured on archival pigment glass tiles. And so I found a manufacturer that would transfer any kind of digital image onto glass, ceramic, tiles, and stone. And I decided to use the glass because of the beautiful pebble surface and the light reflective quality that you would get in any church, especially in cathedrals. And this incorporates a number of people that I wanted to represent. Unfortunately, I couldn't represent more than what I could, but part of this project was to bring in graduate art students from the University of Notre Dame and to work with me in certain sections. And I was able to incorporate some of their art into the design. So it also became a collaborative project. Next, please. And this is the mural installed at the Duncan Student Center. And along with that, there's also a website which points to each of the elements, each of the images in the mural, and has some of a historical, if not symbolic, content on the mural. And that's it. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. I'm also so excited and honored to be here with Marcela and with artists I admire and respect so much. So I'm going to show you one of the paintings that particularly impacted me from the Whitney exhibition, which is this painting, My Nieces, by Maria Izquierdo. And Maria Izquierdo was an artist that is not as well known in some ways in the United States as Los Tres Grandes, but she was a contemporary of the muralists. And she was actually from Jalisco and then came to Mexico City when she was 14 because she was married at age 14. And what I love about her work is the way that she kind of really depicts like the quotidian and kind of still lives, which she called naturalezas vivas instead of muertas, and the way she contextualizes all her sitters with their surrounding and with kind of the daily activity of their life. Could we go to the next image, please? So these are two images. The one on the right is a Maria Izquierdo image of circus performers, which she is very well known for throughout her life. I think it's said that she visited the circus once, but there was also a story about how she was almost mauled by horses once, and so therefore her little horses have particular kind of very animate expressions. And she's like particularly important to me because when I was a teenager and growing up in Mexico City, I went with my mother to the basement of my stepfather's home, and we found this little painting of the circus performer. And later we realized that it was a Maria Izquierdo that my stepfather's mother had bought from the artist directly back in the day. And later my family had to sell this painting, but for some reason, this artist, Maria Izquierdo, really looms large and became kind of a specter in my mind since then. She was also, this is the image on the right is a drawing that she was making for a commission she was asked to do for the Department of the Distrito Federal, which was going to be her mural. It was called Música y Tragedia, I think. And the muralists, Diego Rivera and Siqueiros, were on this panel judging who would be given this commission. And even though she was Diego Rivera's student when she came to study in Mexico in the Academia de San Carlos when she was younger, they later on said that even though many critics during the time said that she was one of the best painters of the time, the muralists said that it was too kind of rudimentary, the composition, and therefore they kind of vetoed her, and this mural, which had all the potential to be, was kind of vetoed by the muralists. So it's interesting because during the time, even though there was quite a few Mexican female painters, but there wasn't a mural that was as important as from the Tres Grandes made by a woman. And I guess let's go to the next image, please. This image is a little off to the right. Maybe you can't see the whole thing, but it's called, this is by me. It's La Talaverita, Sunday Morning, New York Times. And it's a family I met in 2012 when I was teaching at Immigrant Movement International in Queens, where I was teaching and kind of volunteering my time to lead a class that was kind of around the notions of like teaching people English through feminist art history. And I met this one family, Veronica, Marisa, and Gustavo. This is Gustavo and Marisa. Since then, and working with them very closely over the years has become like a model for different ways in which I approach other community groups, where I really start with individuals and this kind of mutual witnessing face to face, where I paint my sitters oftentimes from life. And then the compositions are kind of made through a montage of like different temporal experiences. In this case, tiles from Puebla, where this family is from. Puebla has a long tradition of tiles that are called talavera. And then on the other hand, the contingent situation in which these sitters find themselves reading the New York Times in their home in Queens. So I've just been very interested also in this kind of encounter face to face when I paint people from live sittings and the kind of relationships that occur and the conversations that happen in this kind of mutual witnessing, where the sitters that I'm painting become the first witnesses of the work's creation. And so I took from Maria Izquierdo this kind of notion of like the individual within the group. And if we go to the next image, this is a painting I did while on location as well. I was commissioned by the Art on the Underground in London for the Brixton station in South London to make a large mural. This is a painting that was later made into a huge vinyl that went over the Brixton station. And I was in residence. My studio was located in the back of the station. And over the almost 4 months, 3 months and a half, I was in residence painting in the back of the station and sitting with 15 sitters from the station itself. And I'm really interested in thinking about how like the individual assembles within a group, you know, how different workforces or leisure spaces kind of converge people into a whole, you know, and what kind of relationships I see between people, and therefore the compositions end up becoming a manifestation of the relationships I see between when I get to know these sitters. Like I would be there in the back of the station and I could witness their pool table and their off hours. And I was working alongside, and the sitters would kind of come in and see me paint, and they would kind of have input and give me feedback, not only when I painted their face, but as the composition and the larger whole came into being. For a long time, I've been very interested in a thinker, Emmanuel Levinas, that says that all ethics comes from this face-to-face relationship. And I feel that, you know, when I was in Brixton, a lot of the people I was painting were telling me all about their opinions about Brexit. And I find that when you're like face to face with somebody and kind of encountering their materiality and their physical presence, it's ideology kind of goes out the door. And to me, it's like an experiment in kind of being present to somebody that's different than yourself. And so So again, this kind of relationship between the individual and the larger whole is something that's been very important to me. If we go to the next image, this is one of the last, I think this is the last image I'm going to show you. And it's the body of work I'm working on right now. Actually, behind me in my studio are the rest of the paintings. But since the summer, I've been working with art with the NHS in Liverpool, and I've been talking to people that are from various different hospitals in Liverpool. I was supposed to be on site doing a commission there as well, but because the pandemic hit, I quickly shifted my practice in some way. And this is the first time I've been working remotely. And so I talked to people from various different hospitals in Liverpool, Alder Hey Children's Hospital, the Royal Hospital, and a few others, and ended up painting a whole ER team, and started to understand the kind of culture of that, of like the inner workings of a hospital. And I was communicating with them via Zoom and having various sittings where we'd talk about their work, their work practices and their like coping mechanisms during this pandemic. And so again, even though I made a couple very large paintings that kind of encompass this idea of a large mural, many of the sitters, I'm interested in this dichotomy as we see in this drawing where this is a nurse that's kind of looking at an amulet of a person he cares about. And actually I'm pairing it with flowers that I found here in Los Angeles as a way of kind of giving him a tribute and sending him flowers from afar. But this kind of idea of a space that's where a sitter kind of finds themselves away from the state and kind of notions of autonomy, a place where the state cannot interfere with your private life, and kind of this relationship between the private and the public, and making group portraits that aren't really about narratives or about kind of ideology, but thinking about making a manifestation in some ways of the interiority of the various sitters I work with. So I think I'll hand it over to Derek after this image.
All right. Thank you, Aliza. I too am happy to be here and happy to be in the company of such wonderful artists. I'm delighted learning about Judy's work. And Juan was a professor of mine at Hunter, who was especially instrumental. And I'm a big fan and friend of Aliza's work. Really loved looking at those images. I'm going to be fairly brief, and I'll speak about a very practical concern. I've been to the show 3 times. I love Vida Americana as a resource, and I'm sure I'm not the only painter out there that goes to museums to look at paintings and to learn from them in a very practical way. Very excited when I can see pencil marks and evidence of the process. I like to get up close to the canvas and so on and so forth. In this case, this particular painting from Alfredo Ramos Martinez, this painting is informative to me formally in how the composition is constructed. That you have a very sort of dense, populated picture plane made up of multiple figures, and they are really truncated, and you're using repetition in a way that creates a pattern that then sort of breaks itself at particular points. I've been very interested this year in this notion because I make what we'll look at in a minute called crowd paintings that focus around patterning and repetition, ideas of similarity and continuation, closure, proximity, symmetry, and order, which are all kind of organized around the principles of Gestalt theory we see at work in the work of the early muralists. Let's go to the second image. And you'll see in a second how these inform my work. This, of course, is The Flower Festival by Diego Rivera. And we can see one, that there's a nod towards the naturalistic. He uses a bit of local color, but the forms are very stylized and organized along a central axis. And so this kind of hyper focus on symmetry and repetition is something that I bring directly into my work. And I really find it to be a very compelling way to underscore narrative. So let's look at one of my paintings now that really do put into action this notion of the Gestalt and how we see similarity and proximity operate. The idea of closure is that if the human eye sees enough information, repeat enough times, and then there's a gap, that the mind will fill in the picture. That's something that we saw in the earlier work, and something that I also use here. Also, this idea of class through symbols. In this painting, two-party system, I really wanted to merge together this old idea of Democrats and Republicans from a kind of a period of the gentry, and Crips and Bloods, and how the do-rags and top hats and baseball caps can point to class, which is very present in the work of the muralists as well. And the final image really goes back to Diego Rivera's work that we just looked at. And you can see here how I deploy the strategy of symmetry on a central axis, and the idea of repetition, and also flattening perspective, where the figures at the very top should appear smaller than those at the front, but I have given equal weight to all the figures to underscore the idea of repetition. This is directly out of the playbook of the muralists, principally Diego Rivera. And the show is something I continue to return to and learn from. So I will end my remarks there and open up to our moderators. Thank you.
Thank you, Derek and Judith, Juan, Aliza. That was really incredible, amazing. I want to encourage everyone to ask questions. I'm going to start with a couple of questions, but go ahead and start typing those questions. And also the artists, please feel free to engage with one another. I think my first question has to do with technique and process. And I think you're all probably familiar with something that Siqueiro said, that, you know, revolutionary ideas required revolutionary techniques. And he even went on to call the paintbrush an implement of hair and wood in the age of steel. And I don't wish to suggest that we have to take this literally, but more to think of how we see, or how you see, your own process or processes and techniques employed as a reflection of these times and what this moment demands. And, you know, I can think specifically of Judy, the mural, especially the last murals that you showed, are very technologically advanced. And at one point in the dress rehearsal yesterday, I think you were referring to that last mural of Robert Kennedy. You said that the technique makes it impossible to erase you. And I might be paraphrasing, but I love that. And Derek, I think, you know, your paintings are sort of a reverse fresco, or that's the way I can only explain it in my head, in the sense that you layer your canvases almost as if you're building a wall, but then you peel off and excavate the images, almost like an archaeological find. And Juan and Aliza, you're both more of like easel painters in a more traditional sense, although Juan, you showed us that great mural made of digital images. And you also have, you know, collage techniques in your paintings. But also in terms of subject matter, you reference radical politics in a quite literal way in your choice of people that, you know, that you paint and you pay tribute. And Aliza, you know, your use of light and a lot of white and how you cast your sitters is also quite radical, if we might call it that. So long-winded way of saying, could you please share your thoughts about this idea of radical techniques to express radical ideas?
I guess I could jump in on this since a lot of my new work has been absolutely focused on this idea that we have to come up with new techniques, partially because of the issues that we faced. Those most radical imageries, that imagery that could be controversial, are those that are disappeared. I mean, somebody just sent me a message that in an article about the disappearance of Black Lives Matter murals. Right now, they're being taken off the walls. So the first things that are disappeared are works that are controversial, and increasingly, without the public support for public murals, what has happened is that we've gotten more and more decorative works that are done, you know, with sort of a decorative notion in mind by corporations that are commissioning, because there's no public commissioning or very little public commissioning. So the technical method that I'm working, for example, on with Kennedy and DIA, is that you can actually put this into a digital file, and if the work is destroyed or if it's taken away or removed, it can absolutely be remade at any scale for another site. And that's a pretty powerful tool to keep in your box as a recovery. Right now, the Denver International mural is over 20 years old. The story of my family's migration, the story of the migration of hundreds of thousands of people that came during the Mexican Revolution on the Santa Fe Trail up into the Southwest and transformed the Southwest. And many people were already there, but there was a great migration. That work is being completely restored. And it was in a window bank for all these years, and there was fading, and the work is being redone. The technology is advanced, and it will be up now probably for 30 years before it will need any treatment again. So this is pretty exciting in terms of those techniques. And I think that Siqueiros would have loved it. He'd have been on those computers.
Well, let me jump in and just talk about. I mean, what's kind of important for me is that the fact that I am a painter as well as a photographer, and back in the 70s and the 80s and the 90s, being out in the street shooting a photograph of Puerto Rican and Latino neighborhoods, and going to demonstrations and other kinds of manifestation for housing, for independence for Puerto Rico, and so on and so forth. I lived in an environment where there was just all these murals. Even in my neighborhood in Bushwick, and when I was going to school at Cooper Union, City Arts Workshop were making all of these incredible murals within the area, and of course, being exposed to the Mexican muralists really confirmed to me where I wanted to go with my art. And the early paintings that I did in undergraduate school were emulation of Mexican muralist art. But being exposed to many different kinds of art forms, like abstract expressionism, conceptual art, being very involved with text, with words, with poetry, I kind of like radically switch to create this language, which was more semiotically activating, and I wanted the work to go beyond just a question of presenting a narrative, but to make the work as evocative as possible. So the history of art and the history of painting has informed my work a lot, and I'm working in a way that I feel that I can invest not only a lot of the information that is accessible to people, but also create a kind of impact that would pull people in and affect people in a very direct way. So everything that has gone down throughout history, plus living in an environment where I'm living in an extremely active environment where it's not just a manifestation of murals and even memorial paintings of people who have been killed or shot down in my neighborhood, but also the constant postering of advertisement, one on top of each other. I myself did a lot of postering in the street, and the graffiti. Growing up in the beginning of that, all of that, I decided to want to take it into the studio and see how that works out for me. And that's where the improvisational process, in the same way that I was running around in the late evenings with a couple of people with a pail of paste and posters that sometimes I have designed, and just poster out in the street and making sure that we don't get caught by the cops, which we have on a number of occasions. All of that really inform how I should approach my work, and the breakthrough took place at some point in 1980, 81. So I kind of feel that being influenced so much and impact inspired by Mexican muralist art and muralist art in the United States, they really echo my own political activist sentiment. It's like this one-on-one communication, and they're the one that show me so many examples and possibilities, not to mention the other movements in art, and how I was able to synthesize and fuse them, and it's something that is still ongoing to this day.
Yeah, I don't know if I'm muted. Okay. I also I was so influenced by the muralists, and growing up in Mexico City and seeing the Poliforum Siqueiros and being like, what was that made out of? Like, what is the material that's made of? It's so incredibly three-dimensional. And I was an abstract painter for many years, and I went deep into the history of how much like Siqueiros influenced Pollock and all that. It was so fascinating to me. But I guess now the way that I kind of manifest the way that I'm witnessing people face to face is the way I kind of paint people's faces by this kind of faceting of color, which is a way of kind of just really showing the amount of time I spend with particular subjects. And as well as like pairing my work with videos and letting the work, letting kind of a document of the sitters speak alongside the work. But I think when I think about more kind of revolutionary art, I actually even think about something that you told me, Marcela, at one point, that a lot of contemporary museums are thinking much more about subjects than objects. And I think and it stuck in my mind so much what you said to me this summer when we had talked. And just the way, like, I think the way we engage with people socially is really like a new technology in a way, how we kind of share resources, like, profit sharing with kind of what you make out of a work with, and kind of engaging with communities much more, and thinking about how you distribute and include subjects socially bring them into the fold of your work, to me is like a new part that wasn't usually associated with two-dimensional work in some ways. And I think the way one can think about two-dimensional work with a social practice as well and engage with larger communities through pedagogy or through various different ways that the work might have a start in painting and then engage in different like social functions as well, is the way I see my work in terms of medium more and more.
Yeah, I want to say about Aliza's work, I would even push further that, this idea of, hero sizing the proletariat, the everyday, to elevate them, to a place of memorial is something that happens in your work that also happened with the muralists. I think to the original question about technique, I think about technique in two ways. One, the actual technique by which I make the work does use kind of quotidian materials very intentionally to point to a certain kind of social economic position. But then I also think about technique in terms of how images are rendered, at least in the space of portraiture. And I think there was an accessibility, which was part of the democratizing impulse in these works to be accessible to the everyday. And I think that's something, at least in my work, and I certainly see that in the other artists on the panel, that there is a certain kind of accessibility. Even in Juan's abstract work, there is a vitality and a repetition in color that's very inviting. But I think that we are all probably invested in accessibility, creating things that have some degree of legibility, that are not opaque or arcane or obscure.
Thank you, Derek. And related to the answer that you just gave, there was an initial question here. If you normally put an underlayer of newspaper under your images, which I know you do, but if you want to elaborate on that.
No, I won't bore you all with the process, but yes, there are several layers, maybe 10 or 11 steps. And I think Marcela pointed to that earlier, that it's a kind of reverse excavation, but there is a lot of accumulation that happens before I actually can start to create an image.
Which is another kind of not coincidence, but you had chosen Alfredo Ramos Martinez, and he also works on the Los Angeles Times.
That's right.
And painting, drawing over that, which is a really nice connection between the two of you. There's another question for Judy that I thought was interesting. It says, one of the most surprising things looking at your website is the expansive archive. Over your career, you have meticulously amassed hundreds of documents, photographs, and testimonials by individuals involved in the creation process of your murals. Do you consider this archive to be an integral influence and part of your artistic process?
Is that a question for me?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. I wasn't sure. Yes. The documentation of, first of all, we were recovering materials that were lost. I mean, a lot of, like in the a series that we did on Central Americans' arrival in Los Angeles in the 80s, there was no material at all about what we call the migration of the Golden People. There were drawings of people surviving a massacre, and a beautiful drawing by a young woman about having survived the El Mesote massacre. And I thought these things are so, that part of the techniques and digital techniques also was like, if the land has memory, if you're dealing with land and memory, which I think comes out of my grandmother's indigenous roots, those pieces were perfect. Those images were perfect in themselves. So they found themselves their way into a painted mural. And therefore they were really important documents because they came out of people's family archives. And then of course, now over the years of working on the Great Wall, the people who participated are part of that story. And, going back to see what's happened to a kid who worked in 1976 on the Great Wall, who they are now, how they became artists or how they became caregivers, how they changed, how they transformed. I think that's part of a story that we're going to be recovering now. So I think documentation is really important. And I have to credit Judy Chicago years ago, who told me, he said, Judy, you have to document your own work because nobody else will. And I took her seriously. I mean, she was so brilliant in her sort of thoughts about, strategies, feminist strategies. And she was one of the first people who spoke to me about that. Well, so now I'm going to say we have 60,000 images at SPARC of murals. Amazing collection of murals.
Incredible legacy. There's an interesting question here. It says, really curious what you all would do if you got a call to help head up a well-resourced 2020 WPA murals project.
What I've been thinking about, that's a wonderful idea. That's what we need. We need to rebuild the infrastructure in America. We need to create another method of actually putting artists to work to do the kinds of interpretation that Juan is doing and that Derek is doing and that Aliza is doing. If given the opportunities for people to be engaged again in place and to create sites of public memory that are not these lost cause monuments, but monuments that really speak to the stories that is the real American story. What an amazing idea that if we could actually populate the country with the stories really of what America is or what it dreams of being, with a practice that we've never really been able to realize. I went when Obama was elected with a group of artists to propose that, and it didn't get currency. There were like, I think 26 or 27 of us in the White House, advocating for this idea, and it didn't go anywhere. But I think we should try again.
I have to agree with Judy. I think, first of all, what the WPA created, years back was an amazing attempt at really presenting the real history of America and the American working class. I mean, this was an incredible, genuine effort that we have much of, and yet they're threatened because of issues pertaining to preservation and things like that. To start another WPA again is an attempt at deconstructing, this colonized, history and resurrecting all of the struggles, all of the things that we've been going throughout the century, and in these last years or so, really present to the public who we are as American and how interconnected we are. So for this to be so multicultural and gender and on and on and on, and really present a genuine voice that truly represent who we are in this country. I mean, since the WPA, there's just been, efforts, and Judy definitely is an incredible example of that. And I'm starting at it, but the point of the matter is that we need a national movement to give our artists the voice, the support to really manifest themselves and speak to who we are.
I guess if it was commissioned again, there's something people really enjoy being painted. When you actually depict someone, the realm of representation, there's kind of a joy that people take in seeing themselves represented. But I think it depends on what the budget was. But if I had a big budget, then I'd love to start some kind of thing that would think about people more holistically, where I could actually think about the individuals and a community center and representation, and think about how to align pedagogy with representation, and think about something, especially for the very fraught situation that's happening with immigration right now in the United States and with children, and think about a way to have a space that would be safe, and that would think about people holistically and through representation and art.
Yeah, I think I second all of those ideas from everybody. Wonderful thoughts. And Judy, you call me if you head back to the White House. But it's funny. I think about, of course, I would take the call, but I think about the fact that I live in Harlem, largely because of the spirit of the WPA artists and the Harmon Foundation, and all of that sort of artistic energy exists in my mind and made Harlem feel hospitable. as a place to set up a studio and to create. So I think it has tremendous power, and I think it would be wonderful if we could revisit the WPA in some form or another. I think it's a great question.
Great. And also feel free to raise your hand if you have a question for the other artist. Oh, you do one? Perfect. Go ahead.
I mean, the possibility of this happening really excited me, because one of the things that I've experienced when I've had the opportunity to work on murals is the interaction with people during the time that you're making it, and the conversation that you have with them and what they share with you, and how that in and of itself even influence changes in the mural. The fact is that there is that dialogue and that kind of unison of voices, of exchange, of conversation, and of embracing each other is something that I really, really enjoy the few times that I had an opportunity to make a mural. So a project like this would definitely unite the voices in such a way that I think it would cut down also on a lot of the prejudices and the phobias, and also the ignorance, because people don't really know the real American history. I mean, as a Puerto Rican, I'm a U.S. citizen because I was born in Brooklyn, New York. But the people in the island, people still don't know that they're American citizens. It's a second-class citizenship, but they're American citizens, you know. And so Puerto Rico is like this foreign country, you know. There's so much that could be exchanged and learned from these projects that would definitely inform, educate, and humanize people towards each other.
I mean, listen, somebody just put on the chat that we should start the movement to the WPA. I'm all ready for that, to be a voice in that. And I don't think you could put babies in cages if you could see who people were. I really don't. I do have confidence in our humanity as Americans, and I think that what we need to do is bring that present and to the fore, and to recognize that really, you know, when Diego Rivera's mural was destroyed in Rockefeller Center, there was an entire movement to destroy work which the Rockefellers and, you know, sort of powers that be thought was communist, thought was actually the creation of artwork, that it was radically questioning Americans' corporate powers. And I think one of the things that is really important is that public monies have to be put into these kinds of projects, with a recognition that it's our money, it's the money of the people, and that, you know, the designation of money that should not have a bias. And in fact, you don't necessarily, you know, the question of taking down monuments to put up new monuments. In some way, I'm kind of a radical. I really believe leave everything up and put another thing alongside of it, so you can see where we have been and where we're going. You know, when people were pulling down all the Lenin statues in Russia, I was saying, no, leave those guys up, because that was the sentiment. It really, what you need is alternate monuments, new monuments. I'd like to see, you know, I did a whole study on how many women monuments there were, monuments to women in this country. It's shocking. It's absolutely shocking how few there are. Mostly were muses or were naked figures. Or, you know, how many monuments are there to artists? None. I mean, I saw one of Emily Carr in British Columbia on the street. And that was like, I was so excited to see her as a little bronze statue with her dogs, you know. And it wasn't necessarily a great piece of art, but there was a woman artist on the street corner. And it just made my heart sing, you know, that she could recognize that she could find God in the trees, that she was the Georgia O'Keeffe of the Northwest. So what I'm saying is that we need to humanize ourselves, and we need to know that the struggle against by the Rockefellers and the push toward abstractionism and non-representation was a movement. that America followed. And that's why I have been stubbornly a figurative painter. I love, you know, the work that you have been doing, you know, in terms of your work, Juan. But I feel like my work has to be read by the people. So I always took my father down the wall, and he was a working class guy who worked in a factory. You know, he was a tapicero. He wasn't going to read any, you know, images. I had to have a level of him reading it so that he could understand it, and then to try to deepen it for other people. So I think we need to go back to speaking directly to the people.
Well, I agree with you, and in a way, you know, I mean, it's kind of interesting how people who didn't go to art school and don't have all these MFAs and, you know, working class people can react to a work in ways that you hope you invest, you know, you try to evoke in the work, and how they walk away with an impression where you still reach them, you know. I don't want to be labeled as an abstract painter because that's not what I am. I use photography, I use other figurative elements, and if there's anything coming out of abstract art, it's the way that I compose, I work the texture. Again, you know, the postering, you know, is something that I learned from to communicate directly with people, and I use that a lot. But the other thing that I also wanted to mention is that at this particular time, there's a situation which I'm very concerned about, and many of us have fell victim to censorship because you know, the corporations or certain conservative people who don't want to know who we are or why, you know, they take offense to the work and then they want to censor your work, which is something that I've experienced in a solo show I had at Princeton University. They felt that the work was offensive because of how I use Judeo-Catholic symbolism in my work. But at the same time, there's that show by Philip Guston that has been postponed or canceled. And students are coming to me saying, this artist is a racist artist because of those Ku Klux Klan paintings. And I say, you don't know what you're talking about. You don't know who this artist is. You don't know his history. You don't know his politics. You know, you got this totally wrong. You're just being reactive to what the media or other people are saying. And this is a person that's been around the block forever and ever. And he's one of the people, one of the artists represented in the Vida Americana show. So there's also a level of ignorance, which comes down to educating and informing people, and yes, making the kind of art that really communicates. But at the same time, transcend to a point where the art is not just political, but there's a spiritual center to that work that will hit a lot of people in a very deep way. So as far as the WPA program, Judith, I'm with you. I would join you. Because this must be done. Because right now we're at a point of decadency, and I'm not concerned about the right. I know who they are and what they do and whatever. I'm also concerned about the left in terms of the younger generation not having a full understanding to our trajectory. And so, they want to kill Philip Guston.
Yeah, Juan, thank you so much for surfacing, and all of you, many of the topics that are kind of a subtext to the exhibition. And we're kind of nearing the end, but I wanted to give an opportunity to Aliza and Derek to say some final thoughts if you have, or you want.
I think this dichotomy between abstraction and representation is, to me, is not so clear, because like even Siqueiros, and when they got all Marxist and they would talk about like what the not to what the revolutionary moment really is in creation and everything. It's this kind of breaking and synthesis and breaking again, you know, and I think that happens very clearly even when you're a figurative painter. You know, there's moments, the parts that are most exciting to me are the abstract moments in my paintings, even though there's a lot of legibility. And I think that you know, the modernist artists that were kind of so, that had like their medium so kind of enmeshed with revolutionary potential, you know, and liberatory potential, that to me is like how the form has to really move that. And I just think there's like, it's so complicated, this thing between what is conservative and what's not, and what is legible, and why abstraction has so much revolutionary potential. That's just what I take so much from the history of Pollock and the muralists.
That's a great point. I think, I read a little bit of Barbara Haskell's essay in preparation for today, and she talked about a moment in which murals were dominated by neoclassical imagery and from the Hellenistic period, and American artists started to look to the Mexican muralists because of the soul in the work. And I think what's true of Juan and Judy and Aliza and me is that there's some soul that we're after, that we believe in the power of the work to connect with people in a very real way. And I just wanted to say that I'm honored to be grouped with these artists for that reason. And to all the artists that have tuned in, that are listening, I think the more that we believe in the power of our work to be relevant and to make actual difference, then hopefully the byproduct will be something like the WPA or the CETA that someone posted, and that we can become smaller linkages in a larger movement.
And, you know, we can't end our talk without congratulating the Whitney on this landmark show. I can't, I've waited a lifetime to see a show like this. Thank you, Whitney.
Absolutely.
Thank you. I don't believe in heaven, but if there's one, it was this panel right here. I want to thank everyone, Cristobal, Patri, our live interpreters, Morgan for the live captioning, and of course, our guests, Judy, Juan, Aliza, and Derek. This was amazing. And Megan Hoyer, Director of Public Programs, she's the mastermind behind this event. And for the invaluable support, a big shout out to Andy Hawks. Woohoo, Andy. And thank you for everyone who tuned in tonight. Good evening.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.
See you in the WPA.
Yes. Yes.